My name is Luke Morgan. I'm 48 years old, a retired captain from the United States Marine Corps. I spent 26 years serving my country across 5 continents and more conflicts than I care to name. I've worn the uniform longer than I've worn any other identity. I led recon teams through dust storms in Iraq, walked snow patrols on the Korean DMZ, and buried too many good men in Arlington. But this story isn't about war, not in the way most people think of it. It starts on a Tuesday morning, just after 6 a.m. I was standing in my kitchen, boiling water for instant coffee, the kind that tastes like rust and regret. The dog Charlie, a rescued shepherd mix with a limp, was still sleeping under the window. The house was quiet, like it always is. I live alone now in a single-story brick home just outside Killeen, Texas, not far from the base. There's a worn American flag hanging on the porch. The grass out front is too dry, but I kind of like it that way. Clean lines, no fuss. That morning, I was planning to spend the day organizing old field journals. The kind of task you take on when you have too much time and too little purpose. Then I heard a knock. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft raps against the wooden door. I remember frowning because nobody knocks at my door. I don't get visitors. My neighbors are decent but distant, and I've kept it that way. I put the mug down, told myself it was probably a delivery mistake. I wasn't ready for what I saw when I opened that door. There, on the porch, stood my son, Tyler. He was taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader, hair a little darker. It took me a full 3 seconds to say anything, because I hadn't seen that face in over 12 years. The last time I saw Tyler, he was just a kid with braces and a red baseball glove, crying in the back seat of his mother's car as they drove away from the courthouse. Now he looked like a man. But it wasn't just his face that caught me off guard. It was what he was holding. A wooden box, small, polished, with a brass latch that looked older than him. He didn't say hello right away, just nodded, handed me the box, and said 6 words I'll never forget. "She wanted you to have this." There was no explanation, no preamble, just that box, and that sentence, and his eyes looking straight through me like they were searching for something I'd lost years ago. My hands shook when I took it. It wasn't the weight that surprised me, it was the timing. Why now? Why, after all these years of silence, of courts and lawyers and letters returned unopened? Tyler stepped inside without waiting for permission. He sat at the edge of the old leather couch like he didn't know whether to stay or run. Charlie came up and sniffed him once, then laid down beside him like they'd known each other in another life. I stood there with the box, heart thudding like I was back in a firefight. But this wasn't war. This was worse. Because I knew, in that instant, that whatever was inside that box was going to change everything I thought I knew about her, about myself. About the years I'd spent blaming the wrong people for the pain I couldn't explain. The past had found me again, and this time, it came in the hands of my own blood. 14 years ago, I was stationed in Kandahar, running nighttime intel coordination with local forces. We were stretched thin, sleep-deprived, and one bad call away from disaster every night. My world was heat, sand, radio codes, and silence. The kind of silence that keeps men alive. But nothing prepared me for the silence that came with a manila envelope. It was handed to me by a junior officer during a debrief, like it was just another supply form. I remember staring at my name printed on the front, recognizing her handwriting on the back. My first thought was that something had happened to Tyler, that maybe she was in trouble. I opened it with hands still shaking from a dawn raid, expecting the worst and somehow still getting blindsided. It was a divorce filing, full and final. Her signature was already there. There were statements, claims of abandonment, emotional neglect, and some lawyer-written nonsense about protecting the emotional well-being of the child. It read like fiction, like a stranger had described a version of me that only existed in shadows. There was no warning, no letter, no phone call. Just a decision already made and wrapped in legal terms. I didn't have time or the right mind to process. She took everything. The house in El Paso, the savings we'd built, custody of Tyler. There was no room for debate. I signed because I was 7,000 miles away and surrounded by young men I was responsible for keeping alive. I signed because war doesn't stop for heartbreak. But every night after that, I read those pages like they were battlefield reports, looking for signs, for strategies missed, for a moment when I could have done something different. When I finally came home months later, the house was empty. Her clothes were gone. Tyler's room had been repainted. His Little League trophies boxed up. There was no note, just keys left on the counter, and the echo of a life that had moved on without me. I didn't chase them. I didn't have it in me to fight for something I'd already lost. She'd made her decision, and the courts agreed. I convinced myself she'd done what she needed to protect their peace, even if it destroyed mine. That's what soldiers do, right? We absorb the damage so others don't have to, but it never stopped hurting. Not when I walked past Father's at the park, not when I saw Tyler's old backpack tucked in my closet, and definitely not when Christmas came and the silence in the house pressed down like weight on my chest. I'd served through mortar fire and ambushes, but nothing pierced like the thought that maybe, just maybe, I deserved it. We never spoke after that. No calls, no emails. I didn't know what school Tyler went to or what sport he played. It was like I died and been buried under paperwork. That's what the divorce felt like. Not just separation, era shure. So when he stood on my porch 12 years later, holding that box, I didn't just see my son. I saw a ghost. A reminder of a mission I'd failed without even understanding what the objective was. And I was about to learn that I hadn't known the half of it. Tyler placed the box on the coffee table like it weighed more than it should have. I didn't open it right away. There was something in his face that told me this wasn't just a delivery. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared down at his hands like he wasn't sure if he was ready to say what needed saying. Finally, he looked at me and said that she'd left it for me. His mom, Francine. She was gone. The word didn't hit all at once. I knew what it meant, but it took a few breaths for it to settle in. Dead. After all these years of silence and distance, the final wall had dropped and there would be no more chances. He didn't offer details and I didn't ask. What mattered was the box. It was real wood, dark walnut with brass corners, the kind of thing you don't just buy at a store. There was a small Marine Corps emblem carved into one side. I hadn't seen it before. When I opened the lid, I saw three things. A letter, a weathered Greenfield notebook, and a cassette tape. My hands trembled more with each item I picked up. The letter was on her old stationery, the kind with the watermarked feather she used to write me back in boot camp. I didn't know if I was ready to read it, but Tyler nodded at me like he was giving permission. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting hadn't changed. Still sharp, still fast. The first few lines were gentle, even apologetic. Then the words started cutting. She told me she never wanted the divorce. Not really. That she'd been contacted 6 months before it happened by men who didn't wear uniforms but carried clearance levels deeper than mine. They said my name had come up in an internal investigation. Something about unauthorized weapons transfers during my last tour in Fallujah. She knew it was false. I knew it was false. But the way she told it, they had evidence that could twist shadows into stories. They threatened her, said if she didn't cooperate, I'd be dishonorably discharged, lose my pension, maybe worse. She said the only way to protect me was to cut me out, make it look like I was a negligent father, an absent husband. She signed papers she didn't believe in, told lies she never forgave herself for. She wrote that she'd hoped, one day, I'd understand why she did it, that she hated every day of it, that losing me broke her just as much as it broke me. The notebook, she said, was everything she documented while it happened. Names, dates, threats. She didn't trust anyone, not even the system. And the tape, that was her voice. Her last confession, recorded when she knew time was running out. I didn't know whether to scream or break down. I'd spent 12 years resenting her, blaming her, believing she'd walked out on me because I wasn't enough. And now I was holding proof that she destroyed herself to keep me safe. The woman I thought had betrayed me had, in fact, taken a bullet I never saw coming. That box didn't just hold memories. It held a truth I wasn't ready for, a twist I never could have imagined. And it shattered everything I thought I knew about the worst day of my life. I stared at the cassette tape for a long time before I touched it. My fingers hovered like it was some kind of explosive device, something I had to disarm slowly or risk setting off everything inside me. I hadn't heard her voice in over a decade, not even in a voicemail. And now here it was, trapped in magnetic tape, waiting to be released like a ghost I wasn't sure I could face. I pulled out an old tape player from the bottom of a closet. It had dust on it, but it still worked. When I pushed the play button, there was a pause. Static crackled. Then her voice came through. Soft, measured, steady. She started by saying she didn't know if I'd ever hear this. That if I did, it meant she was gone. I sat back on the couch, fists clenched, heart pounding harder than it ever had on the battlefield. It was like time folded in on itself. Her voice sounded just like it had in our first apartment, back when we still believed we could outrun the weight of duty. She explained everything again, but hearing it in her own voice was different. She said she'd been approached by men from an unnamed agency, that they gave her photos, copies of fake bank transfers, conversations pulled out of context, that they told her if she didn't play along, I'd be buried in dishonor. She called it a war without guns. A quiet operation meant to take down a decorated soldier by breaking the people who loved him. She said she thought she could handle it, that if she bore the hate, took the fall, and disappeared, they'd move on. She cried, just a little, when she talked about Tyler, said she never wanted to separate us, that it killed her every birthday, every missed call, every game she watched alone. But she believed if she stayed close, they'd use her to reach me. So she became the villain. Willingly. There was a pause on the tape, just a breath. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said that love isn't always soft. That sometimes it looks like walking away so the other person gets to stand tall. She said she'd rather have me hate her and live free than love her from a cell. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, and closed my eyes. That voice, those words, they cut deeper than shrapnel. I'd spent years building walls to keep her out of my memory. And in 5 minutes, she tore them all down with the truth. When the tape clicked off, I didn't move. I just sat there, the air thick with everything she left behind. She had fought a war of her own, and no one even knew. She'd been my shield all along, and I never saw it until it was too late. After the tape ended, I sat still for a long time, the kind of stillness that only comes when you realize your entire past just shifted without warning. I looked back down at the box, that same wooden thing that had cracked open a part of me I thought I'd buried with my uniform. There was a second envelope inside, thicker than the letter. My name was written on it in the same sharp script, only this time there was no hesitation in the ink, just certainty. Inside was a bank statement. Attached to it was a note, short and clean. Francine explained that years ago, after one of my final missions in the Middle East, I'd received a classified operations bonus. Hazard pay. Danger close, as we called it. But the funds were wired through a quiet channel, likely to keep it off official records. She had moved the money into a separate account, an account in her name, not because she wanted it, but because she knew if it ever showed up in mine, it would be used as fuel to reignite that old investigation. I stared at the numbers. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to matter, enough to restart a life, enough to put a kid through school, buy a home, or cover the debts of a man who never asked for help. She'd let it sit there for over a decade, never touched a dime. She wrote that it didn't feel like hers. That the moment she took that step, she stopped being my wife in the eyes of the law, but she never stopped being my shield. I ran my fingers along the edge of the box. The wood was worn smooth. The brass was aged, but strong. She must have kept it close all these years, maybe in a closet, maybe under a bed, but never forgotten. She didn't forget me. She didn't forget what we were before everything got complicated. Before duty pulled us in different directions and survival became a matter of emotional sacrifice. She wrote that she wanted me to have the money now, that Tyler knew about it, that this was her way of trying to give me back something that was taken. Not just funds, not just facts, but dignity. Some piece of pride that had been stripped when I thought she'd walked away without reason. My chest ached as I folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope. It didn't make the pain go away. Nothing could undo what 12 years of distance had carved into our lives, but it softened the edges. It told me that somewhere, in all that silence, she was still fighting for me. She saved what mattered, even when I didn't. That's the kind of love you don't see in the moment, only in the aftermath. When the damage settles and all that's left is the truth she kept locked in a wooden box. For me, the silence between us stretched for minutes after I closed the box. Tyler sat there watching me, like he wasn't sure if he should stay or give me space. I hadn't cried in 20 years, but something about that day cracked something inside me, not in a way that made me weak, in a way that made me honest. He spoke first, said he didn't know what to expect coming here. That part of him thought I might slam the door. Another part hoped I'd say nothing and let him leave. But the truth, he said, was that he needed to understand what kind of man his mother had loved enough to ruin herself for. I listened, not like a soldier listens for movement, like a father listens when the years he thought were gone start coming back one sentence at a time. Tyler talked about birthdays I missed, games I didn't know he played, nights he cried wondering if I ever thought about him. He said he was angry, still was, some days, not because I left, but because no one ever told him why. He said his mom never spoke badly of me, just said things were complicated, said I was a good man who served a hard country and carried a heavy burden. But when she got sick and knew her time was short, she sat him down and told him everything. The truth, that she made a choice no child could understand back then, and that he had to make his own choice now. I told him I thought about him every day, that I used to trace his name with my finger on the inside of my helmet before missions, that I kept his first drawing in my rucksack through 4 deployments, and that every time I saw a father and son throwing a ball, I looked away, not because I didn't care, because I cared too much. There were tears, sure, but not the kind that break things, the kind that soften them, the kind that rebuild. We talked for hours, about her, about the years we lost, about the kind of man he was becoming. And somewhere in that conversation, we both started to breathe easier, like two people who'd been holding something underwater for too long. I told him I wanted to do something, not just for her memory, but for others who might find themselves on that same cliff. Parents pulled apart by war, by duty, by systems too rigid to see love behind paperwork. So I took the money she saved, every cent, and I started a scholarship fund in Francine's name. It's for children of service members caught in the cracks, custody battles, deployments, medical separation, legal misfires. Families who lost connection not because they stopped loving, but because the world got too loud around them. I named it the Feather Fund, after the paper she used to write on, after the way she carried us both in silence. Tyler helped me set it up. He insisted on adding a message to the application. One line, handwritten on each acceptance letter. You are more than the space between two people. He's 20 now, studying psychology, wants to help military families with trauma, with communication, with the grief that doesn't show up in medical charts. We talk once a week, sometimes more. He comes over on Sundays now, brings Charlie snacks even though I tell him the dog's on a diet. I lost Francine twice. Once when she signed those papers, and again when her heart gave out before I got the chance to say thank you. But I refused to lose him too. There are some battles you can't win with tactics. Some missions that only start when you come home. This one's mine. And for the first time in a long time, I know I'm not fighting it alone.